Hey everybody. In this video, I want to address a really common question about neural retraining, about rewiring the brain, and specifically for health, for chronic illness, chronic pain, even like long-standing chronic anxiety or depression. A lot of people want to know, how long is it going to take? And that's a great question that does not have a straightforward answer. It just doesn't. I'm sorry about that. I wish that I had a magic wand and I could just be like, nope, everybody's going to get better in 2 months. Go. But it varies a lot. And I'm going to tell you some of the factors that make it vary so that you can kind of get an estimate of what amount of time it may take for you. So if you are starting from a place of ill health, if you haven't been sick very long and your nervous system hasn't been dysregulated very long, then it usually takes less time, quite a bit less time. Whereas if you have been sick or very dysregulated, i.e., very anxious, very depressed, very traumatized, something along those lines for a long time, then it's going to take longer. But that's just one factor. And so some people who are really sick actually rewire much quicker than others. And so we're going to talk about some of the other factors too, but that's a really big one. And I know that people who have been sick a long time really don't want to hear that. They want the magic pill. They want the quick fix. They want to be better yesterday. And I get that. I've been there too. But patience and acceptance that the journey takes time is an incredibly important piece of recovering. And the reason for that is if you are constantly dysregulating yourself by getting so upset about how long it's taking, then you're actually sending yourself backwards. Because we know that nervous system dysregulation impacts every organ system in the body, and in the long term, in the chronic, or if we go into that state really often, then we really hinder our own well-being, our own health, because our organ systems can't work normally in those stressed survival states. So we really do need to use neural retraining early on to get to a place of acceptance and calm and peace with the fact that it may take time. And honestly, it doesn't matter what healing route you go, it takes time. If you've been sick for a really long time, even the most effective approaches out there take time. The naturopathic approach takes time. The only approach that doesn't take time, but really does take time, is the conventional model, right? In the conventional model, where it's a pill for every symptom, you could get rid of your symptom tomorrow, potentially, with a pill. But you haven't actually fixed anything when you do that. You've just squashed it, suppressed it, in order to move on with your life and not really deal with the factors that caused it in the first place, right? So it's not very sustainable medicine. And what usually ends up happening when you do that is a new symptom crops up, or eventually your body adapts to the pill and starts producing the symptom again anyway, even with the pill in your system, right? And so then it becomes this game of how many things do I have to take to keep squashing that symptom? So we don't want to play that game. At least I don't want to play that game. That's totally up to everyone else out there. But I have played that game, actually, and it was spinning my wheels. It was not actually getting me to well-being. And so now what I tell people is, if you need that in order to function, that makes sense. That go for it, right? But just know that it's not resolving the issue. And at the very same time, you need to go for true resolution. Otherwise, your body's going to force you to go after that in that dysfunctional state at some point in the future. So back to what I was talking about, the how much time question. So if you have a lot of trauma, it's likely to take more time. If you have less trauma, it's likely to take less time, right? Usually more trauma results in more nervous system dysregulation. Usually less trauma results in less. But that varies as well. Two people who experience the exact same trauma can have a very different effect. And some people end up having a lot more trauma effects that exist long-term in them, while other people have less. And there are many factors that contribute to that as well. But one of them is your prior history with trauma and your state of regulation or dysregulation when the event occurred. But there are many others as well. So, how much trauma you have, that's the second factor. The third factor is how you approach neural retraining. So, if you approach neural retraining like a type A person, and you are just like, I'm going to do as much as I can every day, and it's all I'm going to do, it's all I'm going to think about, and like, I'm going to conquer this in 3 months. I get that. And to some degree, that sort of mentality can help, right? We need a certain amount of motivation to take any action, right? But it can go too far. It can go to the point where we are stressed and stressing ourselves by putting so much pressure on ourselves to do it perfectly, to do it all the time, to have the result yesterday. And so that is not the best way to approach neural retraining. The best way is to motivate yourself to the degree that you need to take the action you need to take, but then to make peace with the fact that it's going to take time. Yes. So then, as you're using the techniques or you're doing the learning part of it, learning about the brain and the nervous system, whatever you're doing as an activity to improve your health, you want to do it from a lens of self care, of self love, of it being nourishing for you. If you approach neural retraining or anything else for your health from the standpoint of this is a annoying obligation, or this is something I don't want to do and I have to do, then A, you're less likely to do it. And B, it's not going to feel as good. And it's probably not going to give you the same degree of results. So when you do something as a gift to yourself and you truly emotionally get behind that, then it becomes that much more beneficial because you're not going into it in a stress state on top of whatever dysregulation you already have. And so, yes, I encourage everyone to approach neural retraining from that standpoint of not putting a ton of pressure on it. If you have a bad day and you can't bring yourself to do it, it's okay, right? Losing one day is not the end of the world. But the sooner you can get back to it, the better, for sure. And if you do more neural retraining, it usually is a good thing, but we just want to do it in the right way from the right emotional perspective. And if you're struggling with that and it does feel like a chore and it does not feel nourishing and good to you, that's something that you can take to Rewire. You can teach your brain, no, brain, this is actually a really, really beneficial activity for me. It feels good and it's getting me well. And so you can help yourself use neural retraining tools to dissipate all that angst and upset about doing it. And then you can teach the brain to feel this other way about it. And I've helped a number of people do that. So the processes in Wired for Wellness could help you do that. Individual neural retraining experts like myself can help you do that. And it does really help with people sticking to the habits that they want to do more of. So then the last factor is everybody's brain rewires at a different pace. So I have observed this time and time again in working with one-on-one clients, as well as seeing people in the group setting and how fast it's going for them as they work on themselves. And it varies a lot. So in a session with me, one person may be able to rewire 8 traumas and feel completely fine with all of those events in their life at the end of the session, and that will stay that way. Other people will maybe only be able to rewire one or part of one trauma in a session. And I don't think anyone knows exactly why that is. And the interesting thing is, to some degree, it's based on the technique you're using, right? If somebody has a really auditory brain, you may need to use more auditory techniques. If somebody has a really kinesthetic brain that produces really, really strong sensations, you probably need to do more kinesthetic techniques. or somatic techniques. But on another level, it actually doesn't depend on that. Some people, you can use any technique on them and it just is slower. And this is not a factor that we have found we are able to change. Whatever somebody's brain is capable of in terms of change, that seems to be what it is. Now, I will say that as you practice these rewiring techniques, usually people's brains actually do get a bit better at it. Do they transition from being a slow rewire to a really fast rewire? No, not usually. Usually just like slow to medium or medium to fast. And so that's another thing to have, that we really want to cultivate a lot of self-compassion around, right? And we don't want to compare ourselves to others. It's not useful and it just causes stress, right? There's really no point in doing that. It doesn't get you anywhere, at least not anywhere good. So whatever it takes for you is what it takes. And I highly recommend that you get recommendations or you work with a neural retraining expert to get tips for how to make it faster for your particular brain. We can often help you assess what will work better for you based on the way that your brain tends to work. But that's only one piece of it. There is an interesting phenomenon where some people, we tend to see this correlation between people who ruminate a lot on what they're upset about and their traumas and et cetera, being on the slower side to rewire. And neurologically, there's a very good reason for that. The more that you rehearse something or practice it inside yourself, whether it's a memory or an emotional state, the wiring for that in the brain gets stronger, which means it gets more likely to fire and it gets stronger it gets harder to disrupt it. It's absolutely still disruptible and changeable. And we do this every day, even with very stubborn issues. But things that we have talked about in our past that are traumatic, or, you know, feelings we have about our current situation, even if we replay those, rehearse those, talk about those, relive them, think about them constantly, then the neural networking in there is going to get quite strong over time. Then that's going to take a little longer to rewire. It basically just means like instead of there being like 10 words on that Word document, there are 1,000. Right. And so as you're editing that document, you have to delete a lot more, like a lot more in order to then really replace with enough good stuff that the brain then starts to do that instead. So I hope this was helpful for you. Last thing, I will give you a general timeline. I have seen some people when they do both, where they do private sessions and they do the Wired for Wellness group program. I've seen some people go from really sick and dysregulated to doing amazing in a month. However, they need to reinforce that for another several months. So usually it's 3 months minimum is what you'll need to do. And then, like I was saying, for people who are more sick and dysregulated, people with more trauma, people who have practiced their trauma and their emotional upset many, many more times than others and ruminate a lot, that is typically more in the realm of like 18 months. A year to 18 months, I would say. That being said, we are having people in the Wired for Wellness program who are like extremely dysregulated and very sick coming in. And we have people who 6 months into it are like, I am doing amazing. Like all these things have resolved. I'm mostly out of pain. Like I'm way calmer. And so what these people are working on after 6 months is really just reinforcing that in their day-to-day life, making sure it becomes a really, really, really strongly patterned habit to be relaxed, be calm, be regulated, have brain habits that serve that, right? Habits like better and more frequent self-care, habits like doing more things that they love that make them feel regulated and happy, right? Whether that be spending time in nature or spending time with their friends or doing art or whatever, right? Everybody's different, but getting pleasure back into their lives. And then lastly, what many of them are still working on is some of their smaller triggers or triggers they didn't want to address in the beginning. Many people who are very, very sick or very, very dysregulated have lots of triggers, like lots. And so in the beginning, it can seem overwhelming that you've got so much to work on. But many of these people that have been in the program for 6 months are like, "Yeah, I feel like I only have a few things left that I'm really working on, and everything else is doing great." So even though it may take a year or 18 months until you get to that state of optimal, where you are really consistently regulated and feeling great on all levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, you may actually feel a lot better by 3 months and by 6 months and by 9 months. All those time you're gonna be feeling improvement all along the way, but it's going to be gradual, and that's the more typical way that it goes for our client population who, tends to be on the very sick and dysregulated side of things. I hope that that helped you to just know a little bit more about neural retraining and have appropriate expectations going into it, right? Knowing what to expect and making peace with what that is, right? The rate of change of our brain. And obviously, one more factor I forgot to mention is if you utilize the tools more, you are likely to get better results faster. So there is that. We do have some people who have extremely overloaded lives and they really don't get in a lot of neural retraining, so their journey is slower as well. And so I would encourage people who are thinking about going and doing this to, clear some space out in your life. Think about things in your life that you really don't need in order to have a well-rounded life, to feel healthy, to feel vibrant, to feel happy, right? Are you spending 2 hours a day on social media? Well, maybe you could cut that out, right? And do something that truly nourishes you instead of something that probably dysregulates you. I think that's all I have to say on this topic. Thank you guys for listening again. If you found this helpful, please like it, comment on it, and consider subscribing to my channels if you want to hear more on this type of topic. All right, thanks guys.